My daughter-in-law just made the biggest mistake of her life. An hour ago, I got a text that said, "I borrowed your old ring for the party, Grandma. Hope you don't mind." I replied with a smile. "Have fun, dear." But right after I dialed my lawyer Frank's number and told him, "Register the theft of inventory item 847, a $3 million pink diamond ring." An hour later, the police stormed into that elegant party where Cynthia was showing off my ring, thinking she had taken a worthless little trinket. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're from, because this story is going to leave you speechless. My name is Grace. I'm 71 years old, and for the last 10 years, I've been treated like the invisible mother-in-law, the old woman who gets in the way at family gatherings. To my daughter-in-law, Cynthia, I was nothing more than an annoying old woman living in the house my late husband left me. She came into our family a decade ago when she married my son Liam, and from the very first day she made me feel like an intruder in my own home. Cynthia is one of those women who believe the world owes them everything. Elegant, manipulative, always dressed in the finest red and green dresses, showing off expensive jewelry my son bought to keep her happy. From the moment she set foot in my home, she started treating me like her personal maid. "Grace, make me some coffee. Grace, iron my black dress for tonight. Grace, don't make noise when you walk. I have a headache." She never spoke to me with respect. To her, I was just the old woman, as if I didn't even have a name. At family dinners, she would talk about me as if I wasn't there. "Liam, your mother should consider moving into a nursing home. This house is too big for someone her age." And my son, my own son, would just lower his head and mumble, "Mom is fine here, Cynthia." But I knew things were changing. Liam started looking at me differently, as if I were a burden. Cynthia had managed to poison his mind little by little, whispering in his ear that I was too old to take care of such a big house, that they needed the space for their own plans. She had big dreams, turning my living room into her personal office, transforming the garden my husband and I cultivated for 40 years into a modern entertainment area. For years, I endured her humiliations in silence. When guests came over, Cynthia would introduce me as Liam's mother, never as the owner of the house. When she threw parties, I had to hide in my room because, according to her old people, make others feel uncomfortable. There were nights I cried silently, wondering how I had become invisible in the home I built with so much love. What Cynthia never knew, what no one in my family knew, is that my late husband Mark left me much more than this house. During our last years together, Mark had been secretly collecting valuable art jewelry and antiques. He knew I was discreet, that I never flaunted wealth, and he trusted that I would know how to manage his legacy when the time came. In a secret safe hidden behind a painting in my room, I kept a collection worth over $15 million. Among those pieces was the ring Cynthia had just borrowed, a ring with a 5-carat pink diamond designed by a French jeweler in 1920, valued at $3 million. To anyone who didn't know about jewelry, it might just look like an elegant antique ring, but to experts, it was a masterpiece. Today, Cynthia had an important charity gala, one of those fancy events where businessmen's wives show off their best outfits and compete to see who has the most impressive jewelry. For weeks, I had heard her complain that she didn't have the perfect accessory for her gold dress. She had been looking through jewelry catalogs, sighing because the pieces she liked were too expensive even for the generous budget Liam gave her. This morning, while I was watering the plants in the garden, I saw her go into my room without permission. It wasn't the first time she had snooped through my things, but this time was different. I saw her open my jewelry box, that small wooden chest where I keep some less valuable pieces, and her eyes locked on the pink diamond ring. She picked it up, examined it against the light, and I saw that dismissive smile she always had when she thought she had found something she could use. An hour later, I got that text. "I borrowed your old ring for the party. Grandma, hope you don't mind." She didn't even have the courtesy to ask for permission first. She just took it assuming everything I owned was at her disposal, that I was too old and insignificant to have anything of real value. When I read that message, something inside me changed. For 10 years, I had put up with her humiliations, her scorn, her cruel comments about my age and my supposed uselessness. But taking my ring without permission, that ring representing one of the most valuable pieces of Mark's secret collection, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. I sat there in my garden chair looking at the message on my phone, and for the first time in years, I truly smiled. "Have fun, dear," I texted back, but immediately after I dialed the number for Frank, my trusted lawyer. Frank had been Mark's best friend, the only one who knew the whole truth about our hidden fortune. "Frank," I said, my voice firmer than it had been in years, "it's time to activate the protocol you and Mark designed. Cynthia just stole inventory item 847. There was a silence on the other end of the line, and then I heard Frank chuckle. "Grace, are you absolutely sure you want to do this? Once we set this in motion, there's no going back." I confirmed that yes, after a decade of humiliation, it was time for my daughter-in-law to learn exactly who she was dealing with. Frank explained the plan. For years, he had been documenting every piece in Mark's collection, officially registering them as high-value items with specific inventory numbers. Each piece had certificates of authenticity, updated appraisals, and most importantly, insurance for its full value. The ring Cynthia had taken was legally registered as item 847, valued at $3 million. "I'm calling the insurance company immediately," Frank told me. "The protocol states that when a registered item is taken without the owner's authorization, we must report it as a theft immediately. In 30 minutes, the police will have a warrant to recover the stolen property, no matter where it is." While Frank made the necessary calls, I sat in my living room and remembered all the times Cynthia had made me feel invisible. The time she hosted a dinner for Liam's business partners and told me to eat in the kitchen because there wasn't enough room at the dining table. Last Christmas, when she opened expensive gifts Liam had bought her and then handed me a cheap scarf saying, "We got something simple for you because at your age, you don't need much." I remembered the day her friends came over for their book club meeting. I was reading in my favorite chair in the living room when she came in and said in front of everyone, "Grace, could you go to your room? We need privacy to discuss important things." Her friends looked at me with pity, as if I were an old pet that needed to be moved out of the way. But what hurt the most was the conversation I had overheard last week. Cynthia was on the phone with her sister Brenda, and I could hear everything from the hallway. "I swear this old woman is driving me crazy," she said. "She lives in this huge house like a queen, but look at how she dresses, look at her cheap jewelry. It's pathetic. Liam and I are just waiting for her to decide to move into a nursing home, but she's too stubborn. When she's finally gone, I'm going to renovate this whole house, starting by throwing out all her ugly antiques." That conversation was the moment I decided I couldn't stay silent anymore. Cynthia didn't just despise me, she despised everything Mark and I had built together. She had no idea that those ugly antiques she hated so much were worth more money than she could ever earn in several lifetimes. Frank called me back. "Everything is ready, Grace. The theft report has been officially filed. The ring is listed as stolen property, valued at $3 million. I gave the police the address of the hotel where the charity gala is being held. They have orders to recover the stolen property immediately." "And what's going to happen to Cynthia?" I asked. Frank sighed. "Grace, technically she has committed grand theft. We're talking about $3 million. Under the law, she could face several years in prison. But you're the victim, so you can decide if you want to press criminal charges or just get your property back." I told him I wanted to think about it. For now, I just wanted to see Cynthia's face when she realized she had completely underestimated the useless old woman she despised so much. An hour after I filed the report, my phone rang. It was Liam, and he sounded absolutely panicked. "Mom, what's going on? The police just stormed into Cynthia's party. They're saying she stole a $3 million ring. This has to be a terrible mistake." "It's not a mistake, son," I answered calmly. "Your wife took a very valuable piece from your father's collection without permission. That ring is worth exactly $3 million, and she had no right to take it." "What collection? What are you talking about? Dad never owned anything worth $3 million. Mom, you have to call the police and tell them it was a misunderstanding. It was unbelievable. My own son didn't know the truth about the fortune his father had built. Mark had been very careful to keep his investments and collections a secret, even from Liam. He wanted to protect our family from the dangers that come with visible wealth. Kidnappers, scammers, distant relatives showing up asking for money. Liam, I said, there's a lot you don't know about your father and me. Your wife just made a very serious mistake and she's going to face the consequences alone. Mom, have you lost your mind? Cynthia is crying. They're treating her like a criminal. Her friends are recording everything with their phones. Her reputation is ruined. Her reputation, I repeated. And what about the 10 years I've spent putting up with her treating me like trash in my own home? What about all the times she humiliated me in front of people? What about that conversation where she told her sister I was pathetic? Liam went quiet. He knew exactly which conversation I was talking about because he had heard it too and had done nothing to defend me. Mom, please, he finally mumbled. Cynthia can be difficult sometimes, but she doesn't deserve to go to jail over a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Liam. It was theft. And now your wife is going to learn that the woman she despised so much isn't the helpless old woman she thought she was. I hung up the phone and sat in silence processing what had just happened. My son, my own son, had spent 10 years watching his wife humiliate me and had never raised his voice to defend me. Now that the consequences had arrived, he wanted me to be the one to save Cynthia from her own arrogance. But I wasn't going to do it. For the first time in a decade, I wasn't going to be the invisible woman who put up with everything in silence. 20 minutes later, Frank arrived at my house, with Peter, a private investigator he had worked with for years. Peter was a man in his 50s, sharp and professional, specializing in cases of fraud and art theft. Grace, Frank said, Peter has been discreetly investigating Cynthia for the last 6 months, ever since you mentioned your suspicions about her activities. I was shocked. What suspicions? I never told you I suspected Cynthia. Frank smiled. Remember the conversation we had in December when you mentioned that some of your smaller pieces had moved and that you noticed your jewelry box had been disturbed several times? Yes, I remember. I thought it was just my imagination, old age, making me forgetful. It wasn't forgetfulness. Grace, I decided to investigate quietly, and what Peter discovered goes far beyond today's ring. And Peter opened a folder full of photographs and documents. Mrs. Grace, your daughter-in-law, has been selling pieces from your collection for almost 2 years. Small things at first. Antique brooches, pearl earrings, a silver necklace, things you might have thought you lost or put away somewhere. My heart pounded in my chest. We have documented at least 12 different sales at pawn shops and antique stores across the city. The total amount she has sold comes to about $45,000. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Cynthia wasn't just humiliating me and treating me like I was invisible. She had been stealing from me for years. But how did she know which pieces to take without me noticing? She's smart, Peter continued. She only took pieces you rarely wore or that were kept at the back of your drawers. Apparently, she had been mentally cataloging all your jewelry for years, identifying which ones she could take without you noticing their absence immediately. We also have evidence that she's been taking pictures of all your valuable belongings, probably to assess what else she could sell in the future. Frank added, Peter has recordings of Cynthia at 3 different pawn shops where she clearly lies about where the jewelry came from. In one recording, she says they were heirlooms from her deceased grandmother. In another, she claims her husband gave them to her, but she needed quick cash for a medical emergency. I felt a mix of fury and betrayal I had never experienced before. For 2 years, while I was feeling guilty about losing my things while I thought my memory was failing, Cynthia had been systematically stealing from me and then lying to sell my belongings. Even worse, she had been planning to steal more extensively by secretly photographing my collection. There's more, Peter said, turning to the next page of the file. Her spending patterns don't match the official income she and your son have. In the last 2 years, Cynthia has bought over $30,000 worth of clothes paid for expensive spa treatments, lavish vacations, and has been frequenting high-end restaurants. When we match these expenses with the money we know she got from selling your jewelry, the numbers line up perfectly. So the money Cynthia had used to buy all those fancy red and green dresses, those designer handbags she used to look down on me with those expensive shoes she used to trample my self-esteem, it had all come from selling my things. She had been financing her luxurious lifestyle by stealing from me, the useless old woman she despised. But wait, I said, if you've known all this for months, why didn't you tell me? Frank exchanged a look with Peter. Grace, we needed enough evidence to build a solid case. And we wanted to wait until she made a mistake big enough that she couldn't deny it or manipulate the situation. Today's theft of the $3 million ring is exactly that mistake. Just then, my phone rang again. It was an unknown number, but I answered. Mrs. Grace. It was a woman's voice I didn't recognize, sounding nervous. This is Detective Miller from the Metro Police Department. We're at the Plaza Hotel with your daughter-in-law, Cynthia. She is insisting that you gave her permission to take the ring and that this is all a misunderstanding. Could you please come to the hotel to clear this up, Detective Miller? I replied. My daughter-in-law took that ring without my permission. I have the text message where she herself admits she borrowed it without asking me first. Furthermore, that ring is valued at $3 million and is part of a legally registered collection. I understand, ma'am. But your daughter-in-law is very upset, and your son is also here insisting there must be some mistake. He says you've never owned such valuable jewelry and that there's probably an error in the appraisal. I laughed a laugh that surprised even Frank and Peter. Detective, my son is saying I couldn't possibly own valuable jewelry because I'm either too poor or too dumb to own something like that. There was an awkward silence on the other end. Well, ma'am, he mentioned you live on a modest pension and have never shown signs of having that kind of wealth. Detective Miller. I'll be there in an hour, and I'm bringing my lawyer and all the documents that prove not only that the ring is mine, but also that my daughter-in-law has been stealing from me for years. I expect that when I arrive, she will be in police custody, as is appropriate for a thief who has stolen property valued at over $3 million. After I hung up, I looked at Frank and Peter. Gentlemen, it's time for Cynthia and my son to learn exactly who they've been dealing with all these years. Frank smiled. Grace, there's something else you should know before we go to the hotel. Peter discovered that Cynthia has been talking to an art appraiser named Michael, showing him photographs of several pieces from your collection. Apparently, she was planning a much bigger heist. According to our recording, she believed she could sell several of your paintings and sculptures for at least $200,000. Peter added, Mrs. Grace, your daughter-in-law doesn't just see you as a useless old woman. She sees you as a source of income she can exploit without consequences. In her own words, recorded during a phone call with that appraiser, she said, The old woman doesn't even know what she has. I could steal half her stuff and she'd never notice. She's too senile to keep an inventory of her belongings. Those words were like a slap in the face. Cynthia hadn't just been stealing from me, she'd been laughing at me, thinking I was too stupid and useless to realize her crimes. She had been planning to rob me on a massive scale, taking advantage of what she perceived as my senility. Frank, I said, standing up from my chair with a determination I hadn't felt in years, I want you to press every possible charge against Cynthia, not just for today's ring, but for all the thefts over the past 2 years. And I want my son Liam to know exactly what kind of woman he chose as a wife. Are you absolutely sure, Grace? Once we make this public, the whole family will know the truth about Mark's fortune and about Cynthia's crimes. There will be no going back. I looked out the window at the garden that Mark and I had cultivated for 40 years, the garden Cynthia wanted to destroy for her modern entertainment area. I thought about all the humiliations I had endured, all the times I had felt invisible in my own home, all the nights I had cried, wondering if I really was as useless as Cynthia made me feel. Frank, I said, it's time for this senile old woman to teach them a lesson they will never forget. When we arrived at the Plaza Hotel, the scene was exactly as I had imagined. There were at least 5 police cars at the entrance, local reporters who had been drawn by the drama and groups of guests from the charity gala, leaving the hotel whispering and pointing. This was the kind of scandal our city's high society would remember for years. As I entered the lobby, I saw Cynthia immediately. She was sitting on a leather sofa surrounded by 3 police officers, and for the first time in 10 years, she didn't look like the elegant, controlled woman she had always been. Her perfect makeup was streaked with tears, her gold dress was wrinkled, and her hands were cuffed in front of her. The ring, my $3 million ring, was no longer on her finger. Liam was standing next to her, gesturing wildly as he spoke with a detective. When he saw me walk in with Frank and Peter, his expression changed from desperation to something that looked more like fury. He walked quickly towards me, and I could see in his eyes that he blamed me, not his thieving wife, for this whole situation. "Mom, you have to fix this right now," he yelled at me in front of the crowded lobby. "Cynthia is being publicly humiliated because of you. Her friends are posting videos on social media. Her reputation is completely ruined." "Her reputation," I repeated, keeping my voice calm even though I was shaking with anger inside. "Liam, your wife stole a $3 million ring from me. We're not talking about a misunderstanding over a trinket. We're talking about a serious crime." "But Mom, you never told us you had anything so valuable. If we had known, this never would have happened." "Cynthia thought it was just a worthless old ring." Frank stepped forward and handed Liam a thick folder. "Mr. Liam, here are all the documents proving the ring's value along with the certificates of authenticity and insurance policies. Your wife didn't steal a worthless old ring. She stole a historic piece of jewelry valued at $3 million. Liam opened the folder and began to look through the documents. I could see his expression gradually change from disbelief to complete shock. This can't be real. Dad really had these things. Why did you never tell us?" "Because your father knew it was better to keep our wealth private," I explained. "And seeing as how your wife has been stealing from me for 2 years, it seems he was right." "Stealing from you for 2 years? What are you talking about?" Peter stepped forward and showed Liam the complete file on Cynthia. The pictures of her at the pawn shops, the recordings of her lying about where the jewelry came from, the sales receipts, it was all there. "Your wife, Mr. Liam, has been systematically selling your mother's belongings for the last 2 years. We've documented thefts totaling $45,000. Liam was speechless as he reviewed the evidence. I could see his world crumbling before his eyes. The woman he had married, the woman he had allowed to treat me like trash for a decade, was a thief who had been exploiting his own mother. Just then, Detective Miller approached us. "Mrs. Grace, I need you to officially confirm a few details. Did you give your daughter-in-law permission to take the ring in question?" "Absolutely not," I answered firmly. "I have the text message right here where she herself admits she borrowed it without asking my permission. In my world, taking something without permission is called stealing." "And can you confirm that the ring legally belongs to you?" Frank intervened. "Detective, here are all the legal documents. The ring was purchased by Mrs. Grace's late husband in 1975. It's registered in his will, it's insured for its full value, and it's part of the official inventory of the inheritance Mrs. Grace received." The detective reviewed the documents and nodded. "Everything seems to be in order. Mrs. Grace, do you wish to press criminal charges against your daughter-in-law?" Before I could answer, Cynthia shouted from her seat. "Grace, please. It was just a misunderstanding. You know I would never intentionally hurt you. I've always treated you with respect." I turned to her slowly. For the first time in 10 years, Cynthia was speaking to me with desperation instead of contempt. For the first time, she needed me instead of treating me like I was invisible. "Respect?" I asked, walking towards where she was sitting. "You call 10 years of humiliation respect. Respect is telling me to eat in the kitchen when guests came over. Respect is stealing from me for 2 years and then calling me senile." Her eyes filled with panic. "Stealing? I never stole anything from you. This is the first time I've taken anything of yours." Peter stepped forward and showed her the pictures of her at the pawn shops. "Mrs. Cynthia, we have photographic and video evidence of you selling your mother-in-law's belongings on at least 12 different occasions over the past 2 years." Cynthia's face went completely pale. She looked at the photos, then at me, then at Liam, desperately searching for an explanation that could save her. Those were just small pieces I thought she didn't use anymore," she mumbled. "I never thought she would notice. I thought she had forgotten about them." "And that gave you the right to steal them?" I asked. "And to lie at the pawn shop saying they were heirlooms from your grandmother." Liam looked at her in horror. "Cynthia, did you really do that? Were you really stealing my mother's things for years?" Cynthia started crying harder. "Liam, you know how much we needed the extra money. You know your salary wasn't enough for the lifestyle we wanted. And she has so many things. I thought she would never notice a few small pieces were missing." "But they weren't yours to take," Liam yelled. "They belonged to my mother, and you made me believe she was losing her memory when she asked about her things." That's when I realized what had really been happening. Cynthia hadn't just been stealing from me. She had been manipulating Liam into believing I was developing senile dementia. Every time I mentioned I couldn't find something, she would whisper to Liam that it was normal for old people to lose things and forget where they put them. "Detective Miller," I said, feeling a strange and powerful calm. "I want to press all possible charges against my daughter-in-law, not just for today's ring, but for all the thefts she has committed over the past 2 years." "No!" Cynthia screamed. "Please, Grace, I can give everything back. I can pay you back. Don't do this to me." I looked her directly in the eye. "Cynthia, for 10 years, you treated me like I was invisible. You humiliated me in front of guests. You made me feel like a useless burden in my own home. For 2 years, you stole from me while making me believe I was losing my memory. And now that the consequences have arrived, you want me to have mercy on you. But I never thought it was so serious. I never thought you had such valuable things." If you had known I had valuable things, what you would have stolen more." I let her process that question for a moment. "Cynthia, the problem isn't that you didn't know the value of what you stole. The problem is that you stole from me. The problem is that for a decade, you treated me like dirt." Frank approached the detective. "Detective Miller, we also want to file charges for the other documented thefts. We have enough evidence to prosecute at least 12 additional cases of theft." The detective nodded. "Understood. Mrs. Cynthia, you are under arrest for first-degree grand larceny, multiple counts of petty theft and fraud. You have the right to remain silent." As the detective read Cynthia her Miranda rights, I looked at my son Liam. He was standing there watching his wife get officially arrested, finally understanding that the woman he had married was a criminal who had been exploiting his own mother for years. "Mom," he said in a broken voice, I didn't know about any of this. You have to believe me." "Liam," I replied, "maybe you didn't know about the thefts, but you did know how Cynthia treated me. You saw every humiliation, every slight, every moment she made me feel invisible in my own home, and you never said a thing." Liam lowered his head, unable to look me in the eye. He knew I was right. For 10 years he had been a silent witness as his wife turned me into a stranger in my own house, and he had chosen the easy path, to say nothing, to not confront, to not defend his own mother. Now that the truth was out, he finally understood the price of his silence. "Mom," he mumbled, "I thought you two would eventually find a way to get along. I thought if I stayed out of it, things would work themselves out." "Things don't just work themselves out, Liam," I replied. "Especially when one person is systematically abusing another. Your wife didn't just disrespect me for a decade. She stole from me, manipulated me, and was planning to steal even more. And you thought that would just fix itself." As I spoke with Liam, I could see several guests from the charity gala recording the scene with their phones. The story of the millionaire mother-in-law who caught her thieving daughter-in-law was going to be all over social media by the end of the night. For Cynthia, who had built her entire social identity around her image as an elegant and respectable wife, this was worse than prison. Detective Miller finished reading the Miranda rights and began escorting Cynthia towards the exit. But before they could reach the door, Cynthia turned to me with an expression I had never seen before. Pure, desperate fury. "Grace, you don't understand what you've just done," she screamed. "My life is ruined. My friends, my reputation, everything is destroyed." "And why?" I asked calmly. "Because of a stupid ring you never even wore." "No," I replied calmly. "For 10 years of theft, humiliation, and mistreatment, today's ring was simply the straw that broke the camel's back." "But I gave you a family," she continued screaming. "I gave you grandchildren you never had. Liam and I gave you a purpose in your old age." That was the most ridiculous claim I had heard in years. "Cynthia, you didn't give me a family. You turned my family into strangers who treated me like a burden. And as for grandchildren, you two decided not to have children. Remember, you said kids would ruin your figure and interfere with your career." Liam looked more and more uncomfortable with every word that came out of his wife's mouth. I think he was finally seeing Cynthia for who she really was. Manipulative, selfish, and completely willing to lie when the consequences of her actions finally caught up to her. "Grace!" Cynthia yelled as the detective tried to make her walk. "If you go through with this, you'll lose your son forever. Liam will never forgive you for destroying his marriage." I looked at Liam. He was standing there watching his wife make threats as she was being arrested for stealing from his own mother. "Liam," I said, "is that how you feel? Do you think I destroyed your marriage?" Liam was silent for a long moment, processing everything he had discovered in the last 2 hours. His wife wasn't the elegant, sophisticated woman he thought he had won over. She was a thief who had been exploiting his elderly mother for years while manipulating him into believing his mother's forgetfulness was a sign of senility. "No, Mom," he finally said. "My marriage was destroyed the moment Cynthia decided to steal from you for the first time. I just didn't realize it until now." Cynthia was speechless for the first time. She had been counting on Liam to blame me for her problems, as he had done so many times before. But this time the evidence was too clear and the lies too obvious. After they took Cynthia away, Peter handed me an additional folder. "Mrs. Grace, there's something else you should know. During our investigation, we discovered that Cynthia had been in contact with a lawyer specializing in wills and estates. Apparently, she had been researching legal ways to challenge your father-in-law's will if you were to pass away." Liam looked sicker by the second. "What does that mean?" "It means," Frank explained, "that your wife wasn't just stealing from your mother in the present. She was planning for the future, researching how to take over the entire inheritance when your mother died." Peter added, "We found emails between Cynthia and this lawyer where they discussed the possibility of having your mother declared mentally incompetent. The plan was to prove you had senile dementia and therefore lacked the legal capacity to manage your finances or property." My blood ran cold. She was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. "Yes," Peter continued. "In one of the emails, Cynthia mentions that you had been losing things frequently and that this could be used as evidence of mental decline. Of course, we now know you weren't losing things. She was stealing them." Liam sat down heavily in a lobby chair. "Oh my God," he mumbled. She was planning to steal everything from you." "Not only that," Frank added, "we also found that she had been pressuring Liam to convince you to move into a nursing home. Once you were institutionalized, it would have been much easier to get a court order declaring you mentally incompetent." I remembered all the conversations where Cynthia subtly suggested I was too old to live alone, that I needed professional care, that I would be happier in a place designed for people my age. It wasn't genuine concern. It was a calculated strategy to get her hands on my fortune. "Mrs. Grace," Peter said, "your daughter-in-law is much more dangerous than we initially thought. We're not talking about a woman who impulsively took some jewelry. We're talking about someone who had developed a long-term plan to steal your entire inheritance and have you declared mentally incompetent to legally justify it." Liam lifted his head and looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Mom, I never suspected any of this. When Cynthia mentioned the nursing home, I thought it was because she genuinely cared about your well-being." "Liam," I said, sitting next to him, "your wife manipulated you as much as she did me. She knew exactly what to say to make you believe her intentions were good." Frank closed his folder and looked at me seriously. "Grace, with all this evidence, the district attorney will likely offer Cynthia a plea deal. Depending on how we handle this, she could face between 5 and 15 years in prison." "And what about the money she already stole?" I asked. "Most of the pieces she sold were bought by private collectors," Peter explained. "We'll be able to track down and recover about 60% of the stolen value. The rest was probably already spent on her lavish lifestyle." Liam sighed deeply. "Mom, what's going to happen now? What's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to our family?" It was a good question. In the span of 2 hours, my family had been completely transformed. My daughter-in-law was under arrest and facing years in prison. My son finally understood he had been married to a criminal who was planning to steal everything from me. And I, the senile old woman who had been invisible for 10 years, was suddenly the center of attention. "Liam," I said, taking his hand, "what's going to happen now is you're going to have to decide what kind of man you want to be. For 10 years, you were a silent accomplice to your wife's abuse towards me. Now you know the truth about who she really is. The question is, what are you going to do with that information? Mom, I want to fix things with you." I want to make up for all the years I didn't defend you. Making it up to me isn't about money, Liam. It's about respect. It's about never again allowing someone to treat me like I'm invisible in my own home." Liam nodded. Can I stay with you tonight? I don't want to be home alone after all this." For the first time in 10 years, my son was asking me for something instead of demanding that I adapt to his wife's needs. "Of course you can stay, Liam, but tomorrow we need to have a serious talk about how we're going to rebuild our relationship." As we left the hotel, I could see the story was already on the local news. Millionaire grandmother catches thieving daughter-in-law with $3 million ring. By tomorrow, the whole city would know that Grace, the invisible old woman, had turned out to be a woman with more power than anyone had imagined. The next day, I woke up feeling different. For the first time in 10 years, I woke up in my own house without the feeling that I was an intruder in my own home. Liam had slept in his old room, and when I came down for breakfast, I found him in the kitchen making coffee. It was the first time in a decade that someone had made something for me in my own kitchen instead of expecting me to serve everyone else. "Good morning, Mom," he said. And there was something different in his voice, respect, a silent apology in every word. "Good morning, son." I sat at the table where I had eaten breakfast with Mark for 40 years, the table where Cynthia had made me feel like an unwelcome guest for so long. Liam placed a cup of coffee in front of me and sat on the other side. "Mom, I couldn't sleep last night. I kept thinking about all the times Cynthia treated you badly, and I said nothing. I kept remembering all the times you mentioned you couldn't find something, and I thought it was just your memory." "Liam," I interrupted him gently, "you don't need to punish yourself for being manipulated. Cynthia is very smart. She knew exactly how to frame things to make it seem like she was concerned for my well-being while she was robbing me. But I'm your son. I should have been on your side. I should have seen the signs." I took a sip of coffee and looked at him directly. "What matters now is what you're going to do in the future. The question is, are you going to try to save your marriage with a woman who planned to steal everything from me and have me declared mentally incompetent?" Liam was silent for a long moment. I could see the internal struggle on his face. He had been married to Cynthia for 10 years. Despite everything he had discovered, she was still his wife. Just then the phone rang. It was Frank. "Grace, I have important news. The district attorney wants to meet with you this morning. Apparently Cynthia's case is bigger than we initially thought." "Bigger how?" "When they searched her house last night, they found a secret room in the basement. Grace, your daughter-in-law wasn't just stealing from you. She's been running a theft and resale operation of antiques involving several wealthy families in the city." My heart pounded. "What do you mean?" "They found over 50 pieces of art and jewelry that don't belong to her or Liam. Apparently, she has been using her access to high society social events to identify targets and then organizing more elaborate thefts. Your house wasn't her only target. It was her base of operations." Liam turned pale. "Are you saying our house has been the center of a criminal operation for years?" Frank continued. "There's more. They found correspondence indicating that Cynthia had been selling information to professional thieves. House blueprints, family schedules, information about security systems. The FBI is now involved because apparently this operation crosses state lines." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The woman who had shared my table for 10 years, who had slept under my roof, who had eaten my food, had not only been stealing from me, she had been running a criminal enterprise from my own home. "Frank, what does this mean for Liam?" "He could be considered an accomplice. The FBI will want to question him, of course, but so far, all the evidence suggests that Liam had no knowledge of his wife's criminal activities. She was very careful to keep him away from her operation." After I hung up, Liam and I sat in silence. My house, the home that Mark and I had built with so much love, had been violated in ways I was just beginning to understand. "Mom," Liam finally said, "how is it possible that I was married to a criminal for 10 years and never realized it?" "Because she didn't want you to realize it," I replied. "Liam, people like Cynthia are experts at compartmentalizing their lives. To you, she was the elegant wife who accompanied you to social events. To me, she was the daughter-in-law who constantly humiliated me. To her victims, she was the thief who planned robberies. She kept every aspect of her life completely separate." An hour later, Frank arrived with two FBI agents. Agent Karen Silva and Agent Michael Rodriguez introduced themselves and explained that Cynthia's case was now part of a federal investigation into an art and antiques theft ring that had been operating for several years. Mrs. Grace, Agent Silva said, "We believe your daughter-in-law has been using your house as a base of operations for at least 3 years. We've identified connections to thefts in 6 different states." Agent Rodriguez added, "What makes this case particularly interesting is that Cynthia developed a very sophisticated method. Instead of just randomly robbing houses, she cultivated social relationships with wealthy families, studied their homes during social events, and then sold that information to professional thieves." "But how did she manage to keep all this a secret?" Liam asked. "Your wife is extremely intelligent," Agent Silva explained. "She never directly participated in the physical thefts. Her role was that of an information gatherer and facilitator. She would attend charity events, elegant dinners, art openings, and memorize details about other families' homes and possessions." Agent Rodriguez showed a folder full of photographs. "We found hundreds of photos she had secretly taken during social events. Photos of paintings, sculptures, jewelry other women were wearing, even photos of security systems and house layouts." I looked at the photos and recognized many of the houses. They were the homes of families I knew, women I had interacted with at charity events for years. "Agent Silva," I asked, "does this mean other families were also victimized by Cynthia?" "At least 12 families that we've identified so far. The total value of the thefts we've connected to her operation exceeds $2 million. Liam looked completely devastated. "Agent Rodriguez, what's going to happen to me? Are they going to think I was part of this?" "Mr. Liam, we've reviewed your financial records, your communications, your activity patterns. There is no evidence that you had any knowledge of or participation in your wife's criminal activities. However, we need you to cooperate fully with our investigation." Agent Silva looked at me directly. "Mrs. Grace, there's something else you need to know. When we arrested Cynthia last night, she immediately started negotiating. She's offering information on her entire criminal network in exchange for a reduced sentence." "What kind of information?" "Names of all her accomplices, details about unsolved robberies, locations where stolen pieces are hidden. She's willing to give up her entire organization to avoid spending 20 years in prison." Frank leaned forward. "And what does that mean for Grace? How much time could Cynthia face if she cooperates? If her testimony helps solve all the related cases and leads to the arrest of the other members of the network, she could face between 5 and 8 years instead of 20 to 25. Liam sighed deeply. "So even now, even after being arrested, Cynthia is finding ways to manipulate the system to her benefit." "That's how smart criminals work," Agent Rodriguez explained. "They always have an escape plan." After the FBI agents left, I sat in my living room trying to process everything I had learned. My house had been the center of a criminal operation for years. The woman who had made me feel invisible had been using my home to plan crimes against other families like mine. "Mom," Liam said, sitting next to me, "how are we going to get through this? How am I going to rebuild my life after discovering I've been married to a criminal for 10 years? I looked at my son, this 40-year-old man who suddenly looked like a lost child. "Liam, what you're going to do is the same thing I'm going to do. You're going to decide that you will not let Cynthia define the rest of your life. She lied to you, she stole from me, and she used our family for her own criminal purposes. But now that we know the truth, we have the power to decide what to do with that information." "And what do you want to do, Mom?" I smiled, feeling a strength I hadn't experienced in years. "Son, I'm going to show the world exactly who Grace really is. And I'm going to make sure no other family has to go through what we went through." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity that completely transformed my life. Frank had arranged a press conference where I would appear as the main victim of Cynthia's criminal scheme, but also as the woman who had managed to unmask the entire operation. For the first time in 10 years, I was going to be the center of attention for the right reasons. The morning of the press conference, I woke up early and put on my best emerald green dress, the one I had bought for my wedding anniversary with Mark, but had never worn because Cynthia always had sarcastic comments about my outdated clothes. I put on the remaining jewelry from my collection, the pieces Cynthia hadn't managed to steal, and for the first time in a decade, I felt like the elegant, powerful woman I truly was. Liam helped me get to the building where the conference was being held. "Mom," he said as we walked in, "I'm proud of you. I know these past few days have been terrible, but the way you've handled everything, Dad would be proud too." The room was filled with journalists, TV cameras, and curious onlookers who had come to hear the story of the millionaire old woman who caught her criminal daughter-in-law. When I entered the room, I could feel all eyes on me, but this time they weren't looking at me with pity or condescension. They were looking at me with respect, curiosity, even admiration. Frank approached the podium first. "Good morning. My name is Frank, and I represent Mrs. Grace, 71 years old, who was not only the victim of a criminal scheme led by her own daughter-in-law, but was also instrumental in unmasking a theft ring that had been operating for years." Then he invited me to speak. As I approached the microphone, I felt a strange calm. For 10 years I had been silenced, ignored, treated as if my words had no value. Now dozens of people were waiting to hear what I had to say. "My name is Grace," I began, "and for the last 10 years I was a victim of psychological abuse and systematic theft by my daughter-in-law Cynthia. But what I want you to understand is that this isn't just my story. It's the story of many elderly people who are victimized by family members who see them as easy targets." I continued telling my story, but not as a pathetic victim. I told it as a woman who had resisted, who had kept important secrets until the right moment, and who had finally found a way to get justice. "Cynthia thought I was a senile old woman who would never notice her crimes," I said. "But what she didn't know is that my late husband taught me to be observant, patient, and strategic. When I suspected something was wrong, I didn't confront her directly. I investigated, gathered evidence, and waited for the perfect moment to act." A reporter raised his hand. "Mrs. Grace, why did you wait so long to act? Why didn't you report the thefts when they started?" "Because I needed enough evidence to make sure Cynthia couldn't manipulate the situation," I replied. "People like my daughter-in-law are experts at playing the victim. If I had acted too soon with insufficient evidence, she would have found a way to convince everyone that I was a confused old woman making up stories." Another journalist asked, "How does it feel knowing your house was used as the base of operations for a criminal network?" "I feel betrayed, of course, but I also feel powerful, because in the end, I was the one who put a stop to that criminal operation. It was my report that led to the arrests. It was my evidence that unmasked the entire network." After the press conference, something extraordinary began to happen. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists from all over the country wanted to interview me. Documentary producers wanted to tell my story. But the calls that moved me the most were from other older women who had seen the news and recognized elements of my story in their own lives. A woman named Diana called me crying. "Grace, I saw your interview on TV, and I think my son-in-law is stealing from me. My jewelry has been disappearing, but my daughter says it's normal for old people to lose things. After hearing you, I realized that maybe I'm not losing my memory." Another woman, Brenda, told me her daughter-in-law had been pressuring her to sign documents she didn't fully understand. "After seeing your story, I realized I need to get my own lawyer, not trust the lawyer my daughter-in-law recommends." Those conversations made me understand that my experience with Cynthia was not unique. There were thousands of elderly people being victimized by family members who abused their trust, and many of them didn't have the resources or the knowledge to defend themselves. That night, Liam and I had a long, difficult conversation about our future. "Mom," he said, "I've decided to divorce Cynthia. I can't stay married to someone who hurt you so much and turned out to be a criminal." "Are you sure, son? That's a very big decision." "Completely sure. For 10 years, I chose Cynthia over you, and that was the biggest mistake of my life. I'm not going to make the same mistake again." 3 days later, I received an unexpected call. It was a TV producer named Peter who had seen my press conference. "Mrs. Grace, I'd like to propose something to you. Have you considered having your own show where you help other elderly people who might be being victimized by family members?" The idea intrigued me. What kind of show? A show where people can call in to tell their stories and where you can offer advice based on your experience. We could also have legal and psychological experts to help. We'd call it the wisdom of grace or something like that. For the first time in my life, someone was offering me a platform to use my experience and my knowledge to help others. For 71 years, I had been the devoted wife, the self-sacrificing mother, the invisible mother-in-law. Now, finally, I had the chance to be something more, an advocate, an educator, a voice for people who had been silenced like me. "Peter," I said, "I'm interested in your proposal, but I have some conditions." That night, as I prepared to sleep in my house for the first time in years without feeling like an intruder, I reflected on everything that had changed. A week ago, I was the invisible old woman everyone ignored. Now I was a public figure whose story had inspired hundreds of people to examine their own family situations. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Frank. "Grace, I just got news from the FBI. Thanks to your case and the information Cynthia is providing, they have arrested 6 more members of the criminal network. Your courage didn't just save you, it saved many other families from being victimized." I smiled as I turned off the light. Cynthia had spent 10 years trying to make me invisible, to convince me I had no value, that I was too old and useless to matter. But in the end, it was my strength, my patience, and my intelligence that had put an end to her reign of terror. The useless old woman had turned out to be far more powerful than anyone had ever imagined. 2 weeks after the press conference, my life had taken a turn I could have never imagined. The TV show, The Wisdom of Grace, had become a national phenomenon. Every day we received hundreds of calls from elderly people who had finally found the courage to tell their stories of family abuse and theft. Frank had officially established the Grace Foundation for the Protection of the Elderly with an initial donation of $2 million from my secret inheritance. It was ironic. The money Cynthia had been planning to steal from me was now being used to protect other people from criminals like her. But the real satisfaction came when Peter, my private investigator, called me with extraordinary news. Grace Cynthia's testimony has been even more valuable than we expected. The FBI has managed to arrest the entire criminal network, 15 people in total, including the professional thieves, the corrupt appraisers who falsified valuations, and the art dealers who bought the stolen pieces. "And what's going to happen to Cynthia?" I asked. Here comes the interesting part. Despite her cooperation, the judge decided her crimes were too extensive for a reduced sentence. She's going to serve 12 years in federal prison, and when she gets out, she'll have to pay full restitution to all the victims. 12 years. Cynthia, who had spent a decade making me feel invisible, would now be the one to disappear for more than a decade. But the story didn't end there. That same afternoon, I received a call that completely surprised me. "Grace, it's Cynthia." My heart skipped a beat. "How are you calling from prison?" "They let me make one call. Grace, I need to talk to you. It's important." For 10 years, I had avoided direct confrontations with Cynthia, but now with the whole truth out and her in prison, I finally had the courage to hear what she had to say. "Speak, Cynthia." There was a long silence, and then I heard something I had never heard before. Cynthia crying. Not the manipulative tears she had used when she was arrested, but a genuine, desperate cry. "Grace, I need you to know something. When I started stealing from you, I really thought your things were worthless. But later, when I realized they were worth money, I couldn't stop. It was like an addiction. And that's supposed to justify 10 years of humiliation and theft. No, it doesn't justify it. But I need you to understand that I never planned for it to go this far. At first, I just took a small brooch because we needed money for a vacation Liam wanted. When I sold it and no one noticed, I took something else. And then another." I listened in silence as Cynthia continued her confession. "Grace, the truth is I was always jealous of you. You had this beautiful house, you had Mark's respect, you had a life I wanted. And when I came into this family, I expected to be treated like a queen, but you were still the matriarch. I was just the son's wife. So you decided to make me the enemy? Yes, that's exactly what I did. And the more I humiliated you, the more powerful I felt. It was as if by making you small, I became bigger. It was the first time in 10 years that Cynthia had spoken to me with complete honesty. Cynthia, do you know what hurts me the most about all of this? I asked. That for 10 years I really tried to connect with you. I tried to include you in family traditions, to teach you Mark's recipes, to share the memories of this house with you, and you took all of that and used it to hurt me. I know, she mumbled. I know, and that's what hurts me the most now. Grace, in prison, I've had time to think, and I realize I destroyed the only real family I ever had. My own parents abandoned me when I was a teenager. Your family was the only one that gave me a chance to belong to something. And you wasted it. I destroyed it. And not only that, I destroyed Liam too. He called me yesterday to tell me he had filed for divorce. He said he can't stay married to someone who hurt his mother so much. It was true. Liam had been completely transparent with me about his plans to divorce Cynthia. I can't keep pretending my marriage can be saved after everything she did, he had told me. Cynthia, I said, why are you telling me all this? What do you want me to do with this information? I don't want you to do anything. I just wanted you to know that I realize what I lost. I didn't just lose my freedom. I didn't just lose my marriage. I lost the chance to have a real family, to have a mother-in-law who actually cared about me. I did care about you, Cynthia. For years, I really tried to understand why you hated me so much. I didn't hate you. I envied you. And that envy turned me into a monster. I hung up the phone, feeling a strange mix of emotions. I had waited 10 years to hear Cynthia admit the truth about her behavior, but now that she finally had, I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad for all the lost time, for all the wasted opportunities to have a united family. That night, Liam came to have dinner with me. It was something we had started doing regularly since Cynthia's arrest. As we ate, I told him about the phone call. Do you think Cynthia was being sincere? He asked. I think she's finally facing the reality of her actions, I replied. But Liam, what matters now isn't whether Cynthia finally understands what she did wrong. What matters is that we learn from this experience. What do you mean? I mean that for 10 years, our family allowed a toxic person to control the entire family dynamic. I will never again let someone make me feel invisible in my own home. And I hope you never again let someone mistreat the people you love. Liam nodded solemnly. Mom, I've learned the hardest lesson of my life. I will never again choose superficial peace over defending what is right. The next day, I received even better news. The Grace Foundation had received an anonymous $5 million donation from a wealthy family that had been saved from being victimized thanks to the information we had shared on our show. Frank explained. Grace, the Martinez family saw your show last week. Mrs. Martinez realized her granddaughter had been exhibiting the exact same patterns of behavior as Cynthia, pressuring her to sign documents, suggesting she move into a nursing home, borrowing small pieces of jewelry. Thanks to your story, she hired a private investigator and discovered her granddaughter had been planning a scheme similar to Cynthia's. And they managed to stop her in time. Completely. The granddaughter has been arrested, and Mrs. Martinez recovered everything that had been stolen. She says your show saved not only her fortune, but probably her life. It was incredible to think that my story, my pain, had been transformed into something that could protect other families. Cynthia had spent 10 years trying to steal my worth and my dignity, but in the end, it was that very experience that had given me a purpose greater than I had ever imagined. That night, as I got ready for bed, I reflected on the extraordinary journey my life had taken. A month ago, I was an invisible old woman who felt useless in her own home. Now I was a national advocate for the rights of the elderly with a successful TV show and a foundation that was saving families. Cynthia had tried to destroy me, but instead she had awakened a strength I didn't even know I had. The sweetest revenge wasn't seeing her go to prison. The sweetest revenge was discovering exactly who I was when I finally had the courage to stand up for myself. A year after Cynthia's arrest, My life had transformed in ways I could have never imagined. The Wisdom of Grace had become the most watched TV show in its time slot, broadcast in 32 different countries. The Grace Foundation had helped over 1,000 families identify and stop schemes of financial abuse against the elderly. But the most important transformation wasn't public, it was personal. This morning, as I was watering the flowers in the garden Mark and I had planted 40 years ago, I received a completely unexpected visit. Liam arrived with an elegant woman in her 40s with brown hair and a genuine smile that immediately reminded me of Mark's. "Mom," Liam said, clearly nervous, "I want to introduce you to someone very special. This is Natalie and, well, we've been dating for the last 6 months." Natalie approached with confidence but also with respect. "Mrs. Grace, I've heard so much about you. Liam has told me your whole story, and I must say, you're an inspiration to women of all ages." The first thing I noticed about Natalie was how she looked at me with genuine respect, not the condescension I'd received from Cynthia for years. When she spoke to me, she addressed me directly, not Liam, as if I were invisible. "Natalie," I said, "what do you think about the fact that my son is dating you while he's still technically married?" Liam turned pale, but Natalie smiled. "Mrs. Grace, I appreciate your direct question. Liam told me the whole situation with Cynthia before we started dating. The divorce papers were finalized last week. I would never have started a relationship with a married man, no matter the circumstances." I liked her honesty. "And what do you think about having a famous mother-in-law who appears on TV talking about family problems?" Natalie laughed genuinely. "Honestly, I'm proud. You took a terrible experience and turned it into something that's helping thousands of people. That requires extraordinary strength." Over the next few months, I was able to observe the relationship between Liam and Natalie. It was completely different from his marriage to Cynthia. Natalie encouraged Liam to spend time with me, to include me in their plans to value my opinion. When they hosted dinners, they invited me as the matriarch of the family, not as a burden they had to tolerate. The most notable difference was that Natalie genuinely wanted to get to know me. She asked about my experiences with Mark, about the history of our house, about our family traditions. Instead of trying to replace or erase the past, she wanted to be part of our family's continuity. One afternoon, while Natalie and I were preparing dinner together, she asked me something that surprised me. "Mrs. Grace, what can I do to make sure I never become someone like Cynthia?" I paused to think about her question. Natalie Cynthia became what she became because she saw our family as something she could exploit, not as something she could contribute to. You're already different because you care enough to ask the question. But I want to be specific. What behaviors should I avoid? Never try to isolate Liam from his family. Never speak ill of me when I'm not present. Never assume that because I'm older my opinions don't matter. And if you ever have a problem with me, talk to me directly. Don't try to manipulate Liam into being your intermediary." Natalie nodded seriously. "And is there anything I can do proactively to be a good daughter-in-law?" "Recognize that this house, this family has a history that existed before you arrived. Respect that history while you help create new history. And never forget that being part of a family means giving as much as you receive." 6 months later, Liam asked me to go with him to buy an engagement ring for Natalie. It was ironic. Everything had started with Cynthia stealing a $3 million ring, and now I was helping my son choose a ring to symbolize genuine love. "Mom," he said as we looked at different options, "do you think I'm making the right decision? Do you think Natalie and I can build something lasting after everything that happened with Cynthia?" Liam, the difference between Natalie and Cynthia is that Natalie sees our family as something valuable that she wants to protect. Cynthia saw our family as something she could exploit. That fundamental difference means everything. The proposal was perfect. Liam arranged a dinner at our house in the dining room, where for years Cynthia had made me feel like an intruder. But this time I was sitting at the head of the table in my rightful place as the family matriarch while Liam proposed to Natalie. When Natalie said yes, the first thing she did was walk over to me and hug me. "Mrs. Grace," she said with tears in her eyes, "I hope I can be the daughter-in-law you deserve." "Natalie," I replied, "you already are." The wedding day was the happiest family celebration we had had in over a decade. Natalie had insisted that the ceremony be held in our backyard garden, honoring the legacy that Mark and I had built. During the ceremony, Liam asked me to say a few words. 2 years ago, I began, I believed my family's story had ended in humiliation and betrayal. But today, I understand that that terrible experience was simply the end of a chapter, not the end of the book. Natalie welcomed to a family that now knows how to value mutual respect, honesty, and genuine love. After the wedding, as the guests celebrated in the garden, I received an unexpected text message. It was from a woman named Karen, who had been watching my show from the beginning. Grace, I wanted you to know that your story gave me the courage to report my son, who had been stealing my medication to sell it. Thanks to your example, I got my dignity and my health back. Now my son is in rehab, and our relationship is healing. Your courage inspired me to find my own. Those messages came regularly. People from all over the world who had found the strength to stand up for their rights after hearing my story. It was proof that the pain I had suffered had been transformed into something positive and powerful. That night, after all the guests had left, I sat alone in my garden, reflecting on the extraordinary journey I had been on. 2 years ago, I was an invisible old woman victimized by a daughter-in-law who saw me as a nuisance. Now I was a national advocate, a woman with a new daughter-in-law who genuinely respected me and the matriarch of a family rebuilt on foundations of honesty and love. My phone rang one last time. It was Frank. Grace, I have final news on Cynthia. They just rejected her appeal. She's going to serve the full 12 years of her sentence. And how do I feel about that? I asked myself out loud. Only you can answer that question. The truth was, I no longer felt anger toward Cynthia. I felt sorry for her. She had had the chance to be part of a genuine family, and she had wasted it on greed and envy. Now she would spend 12 years in prison while I enjoyed the new life I had built with my courage and determination. Frank, I said, Cynthia is no longer a part of my story. My story is now about the thousands of families we've helped, about the new relationship I have with Liam, about the wonderful daughter-in-law I now have, and about the legacy I am building. After I hung up, I looked up at the stars and whispered, Mark, I hope you're proud. The invisible old woman who almost lost everything finally found her voice, her power, and her purpose. The sweetest revenge wasn't destroying Cynthia. The sweetest revenge was rebuilding myself. And now tell me, have you ever experienced an injustice like this? Have you had to find your own strength to defend yourself against someone who underestimated you? I'd love to hear your story in the comments.